Valkyrie of the fallen stars. The sound of clashing metal and the roar of engines filled the air as the battle on the barren planet Vallaris raged on. The ground was a scorched wasteland, torn apart by the relentless fire of war. Lightning crackled in the sky above, the swirling clouds casting an eerie, otherworldly glow over the battlefield. The Valkyrie forces had come to halt the advance of the Space Marines, and they would fight to the last breath to protect their homeworld. Seraphina, the leader of the Valkyries, stood tall in the midst of the chaos, her golden armor gleaming like a sunbeam through the smoke and dust. Her long, flowing, raven-black hair whipped in the wind, and her piercing blue eyes scanned the battlefield with icy precision. She was a warrior born of the gods, a living legend who had never known defeat. But even as she surveyed the carnage around her, a pang of doubt twisted in her chest. She had been bred for battle, trained from a young age to wield a sword and shield, to command and to lead. Her people, the Valkyries, were warriors. There was no other way. But in the silence of moments like these, when the smoke cleared and the bodies piled up, she often wondered if there was more to life than endless war. Could there be peace? Could there be something beyond this? A sudden explosion near her shattered her thoughts, and Seraphina's sharp instincts kicked in. She spun, her sword slicing through the air with deadly grace, severing the head of an approaching space marine. The body crumpled to the ground, lifeless. "Focus, Seraphina," she muttered under her breath. She had no time for distractions. The Valkyries had fought countless battles against the Space Marines, each one more brutal than the last. The Marines were a formidable force, genetically enhanced soldiers bred for one thing: war. They were relentless, cold, and efficient. But they had never faced an enemy like Seraphina and her Valkyries. And today, the fate of their world hung in the balance. With a swift motion, Seraphina dispatched another soldier, her blade slicing through the Marine's armor with ease. She was a force of nature, unstoppable and fierce. Yet, as she moved through the battlefield, a nagging feeling tugged at her. Something was different today. The Space Marines were fighting with more purpose, more coordination than ever before. It was as if they knew this battle was their last chance. Then through the smoke and dust, she saw him, Captain Kaelen. The Space Marine leader stood on a rise, his massive frame towering over his soldiers. His armor was pristine, a dark metallic sheen that seemed to absorb the light around him. His face was partially concealed by a helmet, but the slit in the visor revealed piercing, stormy gray eyes that locked onto hers across the field. For a moment, time seemed to slow as Seraphina's heart skipped a beat. She had heard of him, Kaelen, the Unstoppable. His name was a legend among the Valkyries, and for good reason. The man was a warrior without equal, his strength and combat skills unmatched. But what struck her now, as their gazes met in the midst of chaos, was not his power. It was something else. Something raw, something magnetic. For a heartbeat, the bloodshed around them faded away. It was just the two of them, warriors locked in a moment of silent recognition. Then the moment shattered as Kaelen's voice, amplified through his helmet speaker, rang out across the battlefield. "Valkyrie!" His voice was like thunder, deep and commanding. "Your world falls today." Seraphina's hand tightened around the hilt of her sword, her eyes narrowing. She had no time for words. She would prove to him and to herself that the Valkyries would never fall. With a battle cry, she charged forward, her blade raised high. Kaelen's men scattered to the sides as he stepped forward, his massive weapon in hand, a long, jagged sword made of dark, unyielding metal. He was a titan among men, his movements smooth and deliberate. He had fought in countless battles, led his soldiers through hell and back. And yet, as Seraphina's silhouette approached him through the dust, a strange sensation stirred within him, a sense of recognition, a pull he couldn't explain. The two warriors met in a clash of metal, their swords striking with a sound like thunder. Sparks flew in every direction as they circled one another, the heat of their weapons almost unbearable. Seraphina's eyes blazed with fury, but as they fought, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just fighting him. She was fighting something deeper. Kaelen's strikes were precise, deadly. He moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent his entire life in battle. And yet, Despite his immense strength, there was something about the way he fought that made Seraphina pause. It was almost as if he too was holding back, restraining himself, not just in battle, but in everything. And the longer they fought, the more she realized that he was not just an enemy. He was something more. Their weapons clashed again and again, and with each strike, Seraphina felt herself becoming more and more captivated. His beauty was undeniable, a dangerous beauty that made her heart race. His jawline was sharp, his features striking, and beneath his helmet, his hair was dark and tousled, falling just below his ears. But it wasn't just his appearance that struck her. It was his presence, the way he moved, the confidence that radiated from him, the deep intensity in his eyes. For the first time in her life, Seraphina hesitated. Her sword wavered for just a moment, and in that instant, Kaelen struck. But instead of landing a lethal blow, he merely grazed her armor. The movement was deliberate. He had pulled his strike. Both warriors paused, eyes locked on each other, breathing heavily in the sudden stillness. "What is this?" Seraphina whispered, her voice trembling with confusion. Why can't you kill me?" Kaelen finished for her, his voice quiet, almost regretful. The air between them crackled with tension, a force neither of them could explain. There was no battle cry, no command to fight, just a moment of shared understanding, something unspoken but undeniable, a feeling that defied all logic. For a heartbeat, they stood frozen, their swords lowered, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. And in that moment, Seraphina realized something she had never thought possible. She couldn't kill him. She didn't want to, and neither did Kaelen. Before either of them could speak, an explosion shook the ground beneath them, and they both snapped back into reality. The battle was still raging around them. The sounds of war were closing in, and the weight of their responsibilities hung heavy in the air. But Seraphina couldn't shake the feeling in her chest. Something had shifted between them, something that neither of them could deny. And it terrified her. The battlefield was a graveyard by the time Seraphina and Kaelen's fleeting encounter ended. The deafening sounds of war, once all-consuming, faded into the background. The explosions, the screams, the clash of weapons, everything seemed distant, swallowed by the tension that had formed between them. Neither could shake the connection that had pulsed between their eyes, a bond so tangible it almost felt like fate itself had woven their paths together. As the smoke and dust began to settle, Seraphina took a step back, her chest heaving, her heart hammering beneath her breastplate. She wanted to flee, to escape the suffocating weight of her thoughts, but her body remained rooted to the spot. Her instincts screamed at her to leave the battlefield, to retreat into the mountains where she could regain control. But her gaze kept returning to Kaelen, standing on the opposite side of the battlefield. Kaelen, too, stood motionless. His hand rested on the hilt of his sword, but his posture was not one of a warrior preparing for another fight. No, it was the stance of someone who had been pulled into a web they couldn't escape. His gray eyes, sharp and cold moments before, now seemed clouded with something like confusion, or perhaps hesitation. Seraphina, Kaelen spoke her name quietly, as if testing it on his tongue before he lowered his sword, taking a single step toward her. He did not advance further, but the move was enough to make her body tense with an unknown anticipation. "You don't belong here," Seraphina found herself saying, her voice low, laced with something vulnerable she wasn't used to admitting. She wasn't just speaking about the war, she was speaking about him, about them. "I don't belong here." Kaelen studied her with a mix of admiration and something darker, something dangerous. "Maybe we both don't." Her heart fluttered painfully in her chest as his words reached her. It was a truth too stark, too honest to ignore. Her soldiers had already begun to regroup, their voices rising in the aftermath of the chaos, but Seraphina could hear the distant shouts and orders growing more frantic with every passing second. They were beginning to realize what had happened, what had transpired between their leader and the Marine captain. She couldn't afford to waste any more time. She had to leave. And yet... "Seraphina," one of her warriors, Alira, called from a distance, her voice laced with panic. "You're not abandoning us, are you?" Seraphina's heart twisted. She knew the weight of the Valkyrie's loyalty. To abandon them now, to flee the battlefield, would it be betrayal? The Valkyries fought for their world. They fought for something that could never be forsaken. But Kaelen's presence remained a pull, an irresistible force tugging at her soul. He wasn't just an enemy. He wasn't just a soldier. He was something more, and she knew deep down that staying would destroy them both. "Alira, fall back," Seraphina called, turning toward her warrior. "Now I will meet you at the retreat." Before Alira could protest, Seraphina turned on her heel and walked away, her steps purposeful. She felt Kaelen's eyes on her as she moved, but she didn't look back. Not yet. The moment Seraphina stepped into the darkened command ship, the weight of her decision settled onto her like an invisible chain. She had made the choice. Fleeing was her only option. As much as she loathed to abandon her people, the connection she had felt with Kaelen had changed everything. She needed time, space, and distance. She needed to think. Her fingers brushed the smooth, cool surface of the ship's controls as she entered the cockpit. The sounds of the ship's systems clicking into life were a balm to her nerves, but it did little to quiet the storm raging inside her. She powered up the engines and navigated the ship toward the uncharted planet Solara. It was a place far from the reach of Valkyrie forces and the Space Marines, a place where she could escape everything, the war, the expectations, and the pull of Kaelen. A sharp hiss of the ship's atmosphere filled the silence as Seraphina adjusted the controls. She knew she couldn't remain on Valkyrie, and she couldn't stay in the war zone either. But that didn't make her decision any easier. Every instinct told her to return to her people, to fight the war she had spent her life preparing for. But those same instincts had been shaken to their core when Kaelen's eyes met hers across the battlefield. Meanwhile, on the other side of the war-torn planet, Kaelen was faced with a similar choice. The Space Marines had already begun to regroup, but Kaelen didn't join them. He stood alone, staring into the distance, his mind swirling with the chaos of what had just occurred. He had led his men with unwavering discipline, driven by a sense of duty, an unrelenting belief that the war was his to finish. But today, for the first time in his life, Kaelen felt a crack in his armor. The Valkyrie had captivated him in a way he couldn't explain. Her beauty was undeniable, her strength even more so. But there was something else. It wasn't just her skill in battle or the way she commanded the battlefield with an unspoken authority. It was the fire in her eyes, the flicker of something that mirrored his own. She was not just a foe. She was a reflection of everything he had tried to ignore about himself, the very thing he had buried under layers of duty and bloodshed. "Kaelen!" A gruff voice called from behind him, snapping him out of his thoughts. He turned to see Adric, one of his most loyal commanders, approaching with a concerned look on his face. "Captain," Adric said cautiously, "what are your orders? We've lost a significant portion of our forces, but we can still win this. The Valkyries are retreating. We should press the advantage." Kaelen's gaze was distant, his mind not on the battlefield, but on the woman who had faced him with such defiance. "No," Kaelen said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "We won't pursue them." Adric frowned, clearly confused. "But, sir—" "I said no," Kaelen repeated, his tone cold now. "We're pulling back. The mission is over." Adric's jaw tightened in disbelief, but he didn't argue. Instead, he simply nodded and saluted before turning to relay the orders to the rest of the troops. Kaelen felt a pang of guilt. He had abandoned his men, left them to pick up the pieces of a lost cause. But as he looked toward the horizon, the battlefield quiet and empty in the aftermath of the chaos, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. His mind kept drifting back to Seraphina, her golden armor gleaming like a beacon of light amid the destruction. He didn't understand it, didn't want to understand it, but there was something he had to do. Without thinking, Kaelen climbed into the cockpit of his own personal ship, punching in the coordinates for Solara. The journey through the stars was long and silent, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would unfold between Seraphina and Kaelen. The vast emptiness of space seemed endless, and yet, as the Valkyrie ship descended toward the planet Solara, it felt as though the weight of the world had been lifted from Seraphina's shoulders. The chaos of battle, the violence, the bloodshed. It was all a distant memory now, replaced by the haunting thought that she had left it behind. She sat alone in the cockpit, her fingers lightly grazing the controls as the planet's surface grew nearer, its vibrant blue-green oceans shimmering below. Solara was a quiet, forgotten world, far from the reach of either the Valkyries or the Space Marines. Its landscapes were vast and untouched, the mountains towering over fields of wildflowers, with no signs of the war that had so consumed Seraphina's life. It was a sanctuary, at least that's what she hoped it would be. But in the quiet hum of the ship, her thoughts were anything but peaceful. The memory of Kaelen's eyes, cold yet understanding, haunted her. She had run from the battlefield, from the Valkyries, but had she run from him, too? Her heart swirled with confusion. She had never felt this way about an enemy before. And yet, Kaelen was not just an enemy. He was a mirror, showing her a reflection of everything she had tried to deny in herself. She had spent her life fighting for a cause she barely understood anymore, her purpose defined by blood and honor. Now, standing at the precipice of something new, something unknown, she wasn't sure which way to turn. The ship settled onto the planet's surface with a soft thud, the engines quieting as Seraphina powered it down. The weight of the decision pressed on her chest as she exited the cockpit, making her way to the back of the vessel. Her armor felt heavier now, a constant reminder of who she was and the world she had left behind. The planet was still and peaceful, the air crisp with the scent of unfamiliar flora. Seraphina took a deep breath, stepping out onto the soft grass and feeling the earth beneath her boots. She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing the serenity of the planet to seep into her soul. Here, she thought, maybe she could find some semblance of peace. A place where she could forget the war, forget the life that had been thrust upon her, and maybe, just maybe, forget him. But no sooner had she taken a few steps into the wild expanse of the alien landscape than a familiar presence made her freeze in place. Her pulse quickened as a deep voice rumbled from behind her. She turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. There, standing on the edge of the clearing, was Kaelen. His tall figure was outlined by the dying light of the setting sun, his armor glinting under the orange and purple sky. The jagged dark sword was slung over his back, and his storm-gray eyes locked with hers, unwavering. There was no hostility in his gaze, no command, just something she couldn't quite define. "You followed me," Seraphina said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and something else, perhaps relief. Kaelen gave a single solemn nod. "I couldn't stay behind, not after what happened." He took a step closer and then another, his gaze fixed on her. "I know what you must think. You think this is madness, what we feel, what happened back there, but I can't ignore it. I can't turn away from it." Seraphina's heart hammered in her chest, a part of her screaming to pull away, to run. This was wrong. This was betrayal. But another part of her, the part that had long been buried beneath layers of duty and armor, wanted nothing more than to let him come closer. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "You've abandoned your men, your cause." Kaelen's gaze softened, though his stance remained firm. "And you've abandoned yours." The words stung, but they were the truth. She had abandoned the Valkyries, her sisters in arms. She had run, just as he had. And yet, neither of them could seem to let go of the pull that connected them. "I couldn't stay, not when it felt like I was fighting a battle that meant nothing anymore," Seraphina confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. The weight of those words, the admission that she had doubts, was like pulling off her armor. It was raw and exposed. "I don't know what this is, Kaelen, what's between us, but I can't deny it. I can't pretend it's not real." For a moment, the world around them seemed to pause. No battle, no armies, just the two of them standing in the silence. And then, Kaelen stepped forward, closing the gap between them. His breath was warm against her skin as he reached out, his hand gently brushing the side of her face. "I don't want to fight anymore, Seraphina. Not you. Not this war. I don't want to be the weapon they made me. I want something else." His voice dropped to a whisper, full of longing. "And I think you want it too." Seraphina's eyes fluttered closed, the feel of his touch sending a shiver through her body. She hadn't realized how much she had longed for this kind of connection, this kind of understanding until now. And yet, everything she had ever known, the duty, the expectation, the war, told her this was wrong. It was impossible. But still, she couldn't pull away. I don't know how to do this, she admitted, her voice shaking. How do we just leave it all behind? Kaelen's fingers found her chin, gently lifting her face toward him. We don't need to leave it behind. We just need to choose something else, a different life, together. For the first time in years, Seraphina found herself wanting to believe in something, wanting to trust him. But before she could respond, a sound pierced the silence, something faint at first but growing louder, the low hum of approaching ships. Her heart lurched in her chest. The moment they shared was already slipping through her fingers. Kaelen's expression darkened as he turned his gaze to the sky. They're coming. Seraphina's eyes widened. Her pulse quickened as the realization hit her. They weren't alone on this planet. She had forgotten to account for the one thing they couldn't outrun. Their pasts. No, she murmured, backing away. We can't be found. Not like this. But the sound grew louder, unmistakable now, an unmistakable hum of propulsion engines, unmistakable to both warriors who had lived their entire lives in pursuit of war. They'll hunt us down, Kaelen said, the words heavy with finality. If they find us, they won't stop. We need to leave, now. Seraphina's mind raced. How could she go back? But the thought of running, together, ignited something inside her, a spark of hope. Her hand reached for his, their fingers entwining with a sense of unity that neither of them had ever known before. Then let's not be found. The two of them ran into the wilderness, leaving the ships, the war, and the past behind them, if only for a while. They were no longer soldiers of their respective armies. They were fugitives. But for the first time in their lives, they were free. And for the first time, Seraphina didn't feel the weight of her armor. She felt the weight of her heart, beating, alive, raw, and unguarded. The night swallowed them whole as Seraphina and Kaelen fled into the wild, untamed forests of Solara. The air was thick with the scent of pine and fresh rain, the kind of earthy, raw aroma that reminded Seraphina of the things she had long forgotten, things she had never allowed herself to feel. They moved in silence, the soft crunch of their boots against the forest floor, the only sound that marked their flight. The stars above were brighter here, undisturbed by the smoke of battle or the light of civilization. For the first time in years, Seraphina felt still. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt this sense of freedom, the kind that came from running without a purpose other than to survive. It wasn't the kind of survival she had known on the battlefield, where each step was calculated, each move a fight for dominance. This was different. It was something softer, something that felt like it could be the beginning of something new. Beside her, Kaelen moved with the same sense of urgency, but there was something else in his stride, something softer than the relentless discipline he had shown on the battlefield. He glanced at her from time to time, his gray eyes searching her face in the moonlight, as though he was trying to read her thoughts. Seraphina wanted to ask him what he was thinking, but the words caught in her throat. They had only just escaped the chaos of their worlds, and now they were running, together, but apart, in their own thoughts. There were no answers waiting for them, no clear path ahead, only the vast unknown of a planet that had never known war. Finally, after what felt like hours of running, Kaelen stopped, turning to her with a steady gaze. We should find shelter. The hunt will be relentless. They'll come for us. Seraphina nodded, breathing heavily as she took in their surroundings. They had reached the edge of a dense thicket, a wall of towering trees that appeared untouched by any kind of human presence. She looked up at the canopy overhead, where the stars glittered through the gaps in the branches. For a moment, the only sound was the soft rustle of the leaves in the breeze. I never thought it would come to this, she said quietly, almost to herself. She crossed her arms over her chest, feeling the weight of her armor, the weight of her past bearing down on her. I've been running my whole life, running toward battle, running away from questions, and now I'm running toward a future I don't even know how to begin. Kaelen's eyes softened as he stepped closer. You're not alone in this, Seraphina. Whatever comes next, I'll be right there with you. We've already left everything behind. We don't need to carry the past with us. She turned to him, her heart pounding against her rib cage. His words felt like a promise. She knew they couldn't stay in the wild forever, but the idea of starting over, the idea of leaving behind the weight of everything they had been, it filled her with an unfamiliar longing. "Kaelen," she said softly, stepping toward him, "what if we don't find anything? What if we don't survive out here? What if this is just a dream? A fleeting moment that will vanish the moment we're found." Kaelen reached out, placing a gentle hand on her arm. His touch was warm, reassuring. "Then we'll fight for it, together, because this us is real. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. There was no uncertainty there, no hesitation. He was as resolute as she had ever been on the battlefield, only this time the fight was different. This time it was for them. She didn't know how to respond. The words felt too small for the storm that churned inside her. All she could do was nod and let him take her hand in his. The connection between them was undeniable, even if they both didn't fully understand it. They were soldiers no longer. They were two fugitives, two people who had dared to dream of something beyond the war. As they continued through the dense woods, searching for shelter, the oppressive weight of their pasts never fully left them. But the more time they spent together, the less it seemed to matter. They found a small clearing near a sparkling stream, a perfect place to set up camp. Kaelen quickly began to gather branches and kindling for a fire, while Seraphina made a cursory check of her weapons. It wasn't that she didn't trust him, she did, but old habits died hard. She had always been prepared for the next threat, and the reality of being hunted was still far too close, too tangible. Once the fire was crackling in front of them, they both sat down on a bed of moss and soft grass, the warmth of the flames washing over them. Seraphina found herself staring into the fire, unsure of where to begin. She didn't know what she wanted to say, but the silence between them felt heavy. She had never been good with words. She had always fought her battles with a blade in hand, not with her heart. "Seraphina," Kaelen began, his voice low but steady. She glanced up at him, startled to hear him speak her name with such tenderness. "I know we don't know what comes next, but I'm not going back. I can't. Not to the war, not to the life I lived before. I've been a soldier my whole life, and I thought that's all I was. But meeting you, it's changed everything." Her heart swelled at his words, the sincerity in them making her chest ache. "I've been running my whole life, Kaelen. I didn't know how to stop, how to breathe, until now." They stared at each other for a long moment, and then, as if guided by some invisible force, they leaned toward each other. Their lips met in a kiss. Tentative at first, as though testing the waters, feeling the depth of what was happening between them. But then, as the fire crackled beside them, the kiss deepened, and the world outside of the clearing seemed to fade away. It was just them, here now, free for the first time in their lives. Seraphina's heart raced, but it wasn't out of fear or battle-ready adrenaline. It was something different, something raw, unrefined, and beautiful. A kind of peace she had never known. When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads resting together, Kaelen whispered, "We don't need to know all the answers. Not yet. We'll face whatever comes next, together." Seraphina smiled softly, her heart full as she leaned into him. For the first time, the weight of the world didn't feel so heavy. The future was still uncertain, and the danger of being hunted still loomed. But in this moment, they were free. They had made their choice. And that was enough.